Good morning, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Joti Brar on a Tuesday morning. Lots to talk about. Let's talk. Good morning, all. We're talking with Joti Brar today, and we've got a lot to discuss. One of the things that I wanted to discuss with Joti today was this issue of democracy in Europe. And what we've been told about democracy, Europe and the Soviet Union, they're out of the way now. And so now the ruling elite in the EU can really help us to enjoy democracy. But it seems to me, based on things that have happened recently, that democracy is nothing but as I can't forget the actor's name, but he would refer to it as a heartbreaking liar's promise in the EU, right? Because it's human rights, democracy. These terms are just bleated out there as though they're real, but in reality, they're nothing but weaponized speech. They're weaponized rhetoric. We have human rights, we have democracy. And when you look at what's going on in Europe, you look at the level of desperation, you look at the ruling elite completely ignoring the needs of the working class, it leads me to make this statement that it was always an illusion. That when times looked like they were kind of good, there was the illusion of democracy. And now that things are getting more difficult for the ruling elite, the illusion is a problem. They can't afford the illusion anymore. So they're just, forget it, France. We'll put in multiple prime ministers. England, multiple prime ministers. Sunak, I could start naming them. Bojo, and every one of them are clowns. It's obvious that none of these people are leaders. Anyway, this illusion of democracy business, Joti, what do you make of it?
So you're absolutely right, Garland. And I think more and more people are having the same epiphany that you've described, that not only are they seeing, hang on, this democracy is totally anti-democratic as far as I am concerned, but then they start to look back at all of the things they thought they knew about how their society works and realize it was never true. It was just that they were living in a cage that had some gold on the bars and some padding on the bars, and that kept them comfortable enough not to pay close enough attention. They didn't realize they didn't really have free speech because they never tested it. They never tested it. They just assumed it was true. Oh, yes, there's definitely free speech. I can say whatever I want, can't I? There's a lovely protest song. I forget who wrote it. I think it was written back in the 60s, and it was putting together some of the big protest movements of that time, which were like the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and the struggle in north of Ireland for liberation. And it talks about, might have been early 70s, it talks about how, so this is something that people who are engaged in struggle against the same rulers of the world that we have in place today, right? Against British imperialism, American imperialism. Those people, when they went into struggle as a collective, what they discovered was, oh, I have the right to say something in a corner quietly where no one can hear me. But if I stand up, united and strong with a lot of other people and try to say it, turns out I don't have the right. Turns out they're going to come for me. And it's going to be guns and barbed wire. And, every type of repression is going to be thrown at me to stop me from speaking if I'm speaking in such a way that it connects with a lot of other people about the reality of this system. So this was always true, as you said, Garland. It's just that there have been countries and segments of populations that have been shielded from this knowledge. And there still are many people who are shielded either through the conditions of their life or because they're literally clinging on to their blinkers because they don't want it to be true, the things they're starting to realize. They don't want to deal with what that means. what that might have to mean in terms of how they respond, right? People want to be able to just go back to what felt like it was safe and nice. But increasingly, people are realizing that that isn't going to be an option. There's no way back. There's only a way forward. And to go forward, we have to understand the reality we're in. Now, it was actually, well, it's throughout Marxism. There are writings from Karl Marx, from Friedrich Engels, and particularly from V.I. Lenin, who wrote the definitive work that kind of collects up the Marxist teaching on this topic. It's called The State and Revolution. And of course, Lenin wrote that book on the eve of the October Revolution. Again, people in rising up in their masses to try to fix the problems that they saw in the world and the problems that were affecting their lives. And it was Lenin's successful attempt to help those people realize that it's not good enough to fight for reforms of the present system, because it's the present system itself which is the root cause of all your problems. And this state, which we're taught to have a kind of, I've said to you before, a superstitious reverence for the institutions of the state, like there's something neutral, there's something that's there for everybody, they're kind of arbiters outside the class struggle, above all power, that in fact what we're looking at is a machinery of control by one's class against the majority. And of course, in all state machinery we've had up until this point, which is the pinnacle of capitalist-imperialist development, have been states of a minority class. So it's not just a state to keep them in power and to protect their property, but it's also a state to control the vast majority of the exploited masses. Right? So these state machineries have a particular character. The character of this state machine is to perpetuate the existence of a small, parasitic, exploiting class, and to keep the struggle, the class struggle of the masses kind of under wraps so that they can be exploited and so that the ruling class can stay on top and stay enjoying its wealth and privilege and luxury. That is the reality of the system we live in. Marxism makes it clear that the very word democracy is not an abstract concept. It has a class content. And depending on the society you live in, that class content is different. So people like to tell us, oh, the ancient Greeks invented democracy. Yes, they did. It was democracy in Greece for whom? For the slave owners. It was not democracy in general for all of the people, right? It was a democracy of the slave owners, and the slaves did not have a say, right? In a capitalist society, we have democracy for the capitalists. It's essentially a democracy of and in monopoly capitalism, you know, one of the things that the smaller scale capitalists get very cross about is they feel disenfranchised. They may have access to some media, but it's not big enough. And they may have some ability to run a small think tank, but it's not big enough to control the governments. They find themselves marginalized and their interests are overridden because in monopoly capitalism that we live in today, Garland, where the ruling class is so tiny and so uber rich, the numbers of people who are actually involved in this genuinely democratic part of the bourgeois democracy is very, very small. They have a whole network of think tanks and means of creating policy and controlling and shaping and grooming politicians and media figures and all the rest of it, civil society, NGOs, all this stuff that they create in academia. They make sure they've got a whole load of mechanisms that have been evolved over a long time, historically. It's not like someone sat down and made a plan how I'm going to control society, evil Dr. No. It's a steady perfection of a machinery of control by a tiny handful of billionaire parasites, essentially. Now, what we have to recognize when we start to wake up to the fact that that is true, and we start to see, okay, yes, democracy has a class content. And so when someone talks about democracy, we always have to ask, democracy for whom? If you want democracy for the working masses, you are going to need to change the whole basis of the society you're living in. It's not going to be good enough to have an election. Even if you were successful in putting 600, I'll just use the British example, if I may, 650 rabid communists, Karl Marx's, into the House of Parliament, that House of Commons, that is not going to create socialism in Britain. Actually, what we've seen with our democratic structures, and we're brought up in Britain to be very proud of our democracy because we have the mother of parliaments and we basically invented modern democracy, don't you know? Because we're better than everybody and it's just natural. And, we're really brought up with this idea that we invented democracy and shipped it around the world and, have the right to tell people how to do things because we just know how to do it better. Actually, if you look at the history of British politics, what you see is the more that working class people were putting pressure on the system for reform and saying it's not fair that we don't have a right, because in the early days of bourgeois democracy in this country, the mass of the poor didn't have a vote. They had no right to representation in parliament. They had to struggle and struggle and struggle and struggle to get the right to a vote. During the period where they were struggling, they were pushed back very hard until the point it became impossible to push them back any further. And as it became necessary for the ruling class to allow the working class to participate in this platform, what you see is the center of decision making essentially shifted away from parliament. Now what you used to see 200 years ago was very much ruling class, members of ruling class families directly occupying the parliament and discussing, the business of the ruling class. And steadily over a period of 100 years or so, you see that those discussions were kind of moved out. The people who were put in there were very much employees of the ruling class rather than members of the ruling class, right? And that has just gone on kind of more and more and more so over time. The mechanisms by which the ruling class now comes to its decisions, decides its policies, writes its policies, and then it's all done behind closed door. And they're handed over to the House of Parliaments for a kind of rubber stamping kind of exercise. But the Parliament has not really had any input into who decided what those laws should be and how they're developed and all the rest of it. So and then we have, ways of managing who gets elected into parliament anyway to make sure they're the kind of people who will be happy to be paid to go along with the charade, right? They don't really want, even by accident, they don't really want a communist getting into parliament who can go, by the way, this is all a charade, right? For me, the only really useful function for trying to get someone elected, if you've got a big enough power base in the working class, and right now, let's face it, the communists do not. If they did have enough of a power base to get a few people elected into parliament, the job of those parliamentarians would not be to run the system better. It would be to expose how the system really runs from the inside, to help people wake up and realize this voting lark is not going to get us what we need. Right. So, yes, you're absolutely right. This is an epiphany people are coming to. Many, many people, and we see it in the USA as well as in Britain and in France and in Germany. While the media focuses very much on the drama of various parties and coalitions and who did what to who and who's had how many votes. And remember in your last election, they said about a landslide and a massive turnaround for Donald Trump. And they did the same for us. Oh, there's a landslide for Keir Starmer. He's got a super majority. The part they're not talking about is the numbers of workers who've disengaged from the process altogether. And this actually has the whole system in a very, very vulnerable state. If they can't persuade people back into voting, we've talked about this before as well, haven't we? This creation of new parties which are presented to us as upsetters, as anti-establishment. And the aim is to pull people back into voting because, number one, so they retain some faith in the ability of this system and this state to deliver for them. but also so they don't get involved in trying to work out what the alternative might be. And so they just keep on the treadmill, and the ruling class can stay in power, essentially.
You know, one of the things I think I'll get you to comment on, and that is the politics of personality, right? And now it's become the politics of, you know, villains and heroes. One of the struggles here in the United States amongst those who are trying to convince people that the whole system is rotten is these people who only focus on Trump. Trump's terrible. Trump's an idiot. Trump's mean. Trump's a fool. Trump's, right? And there are those of us who say I like to put it this way. Trump did not come into American politics. Trump came out of American politics. He is what American politics creates. Ignore Trump. They're like, but Trump's terrible. And I say, well, let me ask you this. You think if Trump dropped dead tomorrow, that J.D. Vance would really turn things around, stand up for the working class? They're like, no, he'd be worse. And I'm like, but I thought Trump was the problem. No one could be worse. So it's this concept of when Biden's in, Biden's the worst possible. He's crazy. He's evil. He's terrible. He's nothing. At the same time, they'll then say, Biden didn't even know what was going on. He was wandering around aimlessly. His brain is shot. And I'm like, those things are mutually exclusive. He can't have like a brainless guy who doesn't know what's going on, yet he's all powerful and all evil. And now it's Trump. Trump's a fool. He doesn't know anything. He's stupid, but he's also all powerful and all evil. It is the concept of the systemic and structural problems rather than there's an individual person that we have to be angry at, because that individual person is the one who's causing everything to go bad. And I'm just like, if they can convince us of that, they can drag us out forever, because they just keep replacing them with another person for us to hate, another pinata for us to hit.
100%, Garland, you're absolutely right. And you know, those words you used are so important: systemic and structural. What we see, the problems we face, these are the result of global economic overproduction crisis. This is baked in to the capitalist system of production for profit. You can't escape these things. Look back at the history of the last 150 years. Look at World War I and World War II. What were they? Those were the inevitable result of global capitalist overproduction crisis. And we are now in that same place again, and we see the direction we're going, right? These things are absolutely inevitable while we allow this system to continue. And the problem is, not enough of us are recognizing, and even if we recognize, we don't realize what we're supposed to do, right? That letting ourselves get sucked into essentially the busyness and distraction of the news cycle, and the tribalism of the culture wars framing of every single issue. So on the one hand, all the issues that they're shouting about at us on the news are mainly not the issues, right? It's all a big load of distraction. Like you say, personality politics. This guy said this guy did this, they're arguing about this and who did what in the Senate. It's like, this is a side show entirely. And the more time you spend watching the news machine, the more you're getting sucked into somebody else's agenda. Who set the priorities of the news cycle? It's not us. It's the owners of the news corporations. Who are they? They're members of the ruling class. So this is their mechanism for telling us what to obsess about. And the first step in freeing yourself is stepping back and saying, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to disconnect and read some books. I'm going to find out what's the big picture that they're not telling me, right? And because otherwise I'm just fodder for their manipulation machine, right? We've got to understand that it's within our power to disconnect ourselves from this obsession over the news cycle. But we have to recognize that that's necessary, right? That the news cycle is not the real news. The news cycle is a big circus. And the culture wars framing is the other aspect of that, the tribalism that's pushed on us. If you'll see increasingly, when things are tribalized and when a culture wars framing is put onto any issue, what happens is all room for sensible, critical thinking is just out of the window. You have to pick your tribe and then scream at the other side, and you have to defend the official position of one tribe or the other, and they're always kind of presented in such a way as to be, you know, totally opposing and incompatible and extreme. And what you'll see on the way these culture wars are run is that each group is encouraged to identify itself with some leadership that is a member of the ruling class, Trump or Biden. You've got to choose one, right? And you have to identify with the leader. So you either love Biden and hate Trump, or you love Trump and hate Biden, right? And that's your tribe. So you're looking to the ruling class as for your saviors. And then you actually, very often, it goes even further than that. You start appealing to the state to repress, in some way or another, the other side, shut them down, kick them off social media, you know, deperson them, expel them from society, right? These are the screams, right? What you've got Trump at the moment screaming about how all leftists, and he says Antifa, which is a state provocation, right, are left. And that is an excuse for winding up his gang to say leftists must be like repressed, to put them all in jail, make them criminal, right? On that side. And then the other side, you know, you've got the Biden lot saying anybody who agrees with anything on the Trump side, they should be kicked off social media. They should be. And each side, as well as picking a ruling class member to be their hero, they're calling on the state to repress the other side. So what you've got with this culture wars wrapping up of every essentially a lot of them are non-issues, but even when they're real issues, they're wrapped up in a culture way so you can't think about what's the real substance of the issue, right? You end up just totally propagandized and turned into a weapon, essentially, of your enemy class against other workers. And that's the thing we've got to really recognize about the culture wars. And I've got to tell you, many people don't realize how they're playing a part in this. For example, let me give you a small example on social media. So people learn that the way to up their views on YouTube or their engagements on Twitter or whatever is to present things in the most antagonistic way possible. We call it clickbait, right? But it's not just clickbait, is it? Why do those things? So number one, they get more engagement, but also the algorithm promotes them. When the algorithm is promoting you, you're not following your own agenda. You're fueling somebody else's agenda. Let's remember, these are not, the social media, like the state, like the media generally, is not a neutral platform. It's owned by your enemy class. Yes, we're allowed to engage with it and create content for it. Isn't that brilliant? They've got us creating content so that they can make money out of and keep the masses, you know, kind of mesmerized by. But what gets promoted is very much what fits with the agenda of the ruling class. So a lot of people think they're being clever and kind of playing the algorithm and finding the way to get big and get paid and get monetized and all of that. But the reality is, if you're getting promoted by these algorithms, it's because you're doing something that is in line with the agenda of your class enemies. And this is something we've just got to get our heads around, Garland, because it's got us all, we've all been mesmerized by this machinery, and we've all been taught to imagine that these platforms are something that's neutral, that we can make them work for us. That's what people think about the rules generally. We've talked about this before, haven't we? How many people spend their lives campaigning to redress the balance of something where the rules got it wrong? And they're like, no, but the rules say this, and the little people should have their say. And this is a travesty of justice, and I'm going to campaign and get it overturned. And they'll spend their whole lives trying to get the rules upheld. And sometimes, usually, they're not successful. They're just bashing their head against a brick wall. Sometimes they'll be successful. When? Like in 50 years' time. And some government, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 governments on from the one that you're actually angry with will go, oh, yes, we're so sorry. That was then. We would never do anything like that, would we? And it just carries on, right? They're busy doing all their own miscarriages of justice, and the people who are upset about that will be getting their pointless, empty apology 50 years down the line, if they can be bothered to spend 50 years campaigning and put their life and soul and energy and resources into it. I suggest to people that it's time to look at things differently, to take a new perspective and find a better outlet for all our energy and activity and resources in life. And that is to recognize that it's the whole system that needs to go, and we've got to organize to make that happen.
Let me, I think I want to give you 1 second, and I think you know where I'm going. Our one thing they're really good at is putting scarecrows out there, putting fake leaders, putting fake villains, putting fake heroes, putting things out there that appear to be one thing that really have no substance to them. We've discussed this. Zohran Mamdani. He is the guy who's going to turn things around in New York City, right? He's going to turn politics around. And I find it interesting that just when the Democratic Party is in collapse and they're just a joke, out comes this guy who seems so different. So here's what he said recently when asked about Venezuela. They just asked him about Venezuela, but he decided he might as well comment on Cuba too. Now, this is so-called socialist. I want to be clear on where I stand. I believe both Nicolas Maduro and Miguel Diaz-Canel are dictators. Their administrations have stifled free and fair elections, jailed political opponents, and suppressed the free and fair press. He says this in the United States, where none of those things are true there, but every one of them is true here. And yet, now here's the interesting part. Here's the game he's playing. And yet, our federal government's long history of punitive policies towards both countries, including extrajudicial killings of Venezuelans and the continuation of a decades-long blockade of Cuba, have only worsened these conditions. Oh, wait a minute. We didn't create those conditions. When we sanctioned away 99% of Venezuela's income, we didn't create the conditions. We somehow worsened them, right? We only worsened them. Democratic socialism is about dignity, justice, and accountability. And above all, it's about building a democracy that works for people, not one that preys on them. It sounds great, except it's just a pack of lies. And I knew as soon as I tried to look up his wife, and there is nothing that you can find about Zohran Mamdani's wife, nothing about her family, nothing about her background. She apparently did not exist before 2022. And then I found out that here's a person who she's been referred to as a Palestinian activist. That's how they referred to her as. But you can never find a statement that she's made. You can never find a rally that she's been involved in. You can never find anything that she's done except drawn some pictures. And she's absolutely loved by Reuters, by the BBC. She worked on a documentary with the BBC. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the New Yorker, they absolutely adore her. But she's a Palestinian activist who has no history. So I looked at it and I'm like, well, there's spookery afoot, shall we say. And then I hear this clown and it's like, okay, Maduro. And I mean, you could probably go to CIA.gov and somewhere in there find that exact quote. Anyway, your thoughts on our democratic socialist savior, Zohran Mamdani.
Garland, it's really nice to see how many people are waking up in the way that you've just described and starting to be able to join the dots for themselves and say, you know what? This all looks suspicious. Haven't we seen all this before? And this is really, I would like to just say something before we get back to the whole issue of democratic socialism. We should recognize what it is that has changed the mood of the masses in the West and the mentality of the masses in the West has fundamentally stemmed from the resistance of people in the oppressed and targeted countries themselves. It is precisely because the Iraqi people resisted so hard the war that was supposed to liberate them. And that's what we were told, wasn't it? We're coming to liberate you from Saddam Hussein. We're on a noble mission. the Afghan people resisted so hard the war that was supposed to, free their women, etc., etc. It was in the resistance that the narratives began to crumble and information began to leak out about the reality versus the media narrative. And we've had this accretion of knowledge that has been accelerating over this time. And in parallel with that, of course, we've had the growing dissatisfaction of workers that makes them more open to looking and listening to alternative information because of the worsening of their own conditions. And that's because of the development of the global economic crisis that I was talking about earlier. So you look at these two things side by side, and you see that the whole landscape has really changed. But it's been that steady drip, drip, drip of new information. This is one of the things, the revolutionary side of the internet, because we talked earlier about the manipulative side, the negative side of the internet, that it's dominated and controlled in vast majority by monopolies. They can decide they can decide what's put in front of you if you're not actively looking. But as soon as you start actively looking for information, there's a whole lot of information out there. Now, the ruling class, again, they've done their best to hide that, to cloak that information by putting a whole load of fake alternative media out there, fake alternative news, all kinds of rabbit holes for you to fall down, conspiracy theory holes. And, there's literally a whole section of the internet just to tell people that there's a flat earth. And, and people are falling down those. But the point is, they are becoming cynical, distrustful of their ruling elites, of the politicians and the media, and they're trying to find better information. And what's revolutionary about the internet is you can find better information. If you persist hard enough, you can find good information and really, really educate and open your eyes. So this issue of democratic socialism should always ring alarm bells for people. Like I said earlier, the question of democracy is always a class question. So, in a capitalist society where the capitalists are the ruling class, democracy is democracy of the capitalists and dictatorship over everyone else. When we have replaced capitalism with socialism, we will also have a state for a considerable period of time. There'll be a time when humanity no longer needs state machines because there will be no more classes, no more exploitation, etc. But that's a way off in the future. Initially, when you've had a revolution, you need a state, right? But it's a state where the working class is now in power. So the state gives democracy to the mass of the people, the mass of working people. The flip side of that is it is a dictatorship over the dispossessed capitalists. Now, that is the dictatorial aspect of socialism that is always screamed about in the West. It's a dictatorship. This is a dictatorship. Only this society is a dictatorship over the vast majority. Under socialism, yes, we will also have a dictatorship that says to the dispossessed super rich, you may not take any action to overthrow the power of the working class. You will have to learn to know your place, and so will your descendants. Now, obviously, they shout and scream about that. They don't want to be working people reduced to being in the ranks of the hoi polloi. They consider themselves to be superior, that it's their God-given right to exploit and loot and lord it over the planet. But they're going to find in the future that it's not their God-given right. So when people say democratic, they need to qualify the term socialism with the term democracy. They are clearly saying that they are a party of capitalism, not a party of socialism, because they are perpetuating the bourgeois kind of propaganda that says most socialism is undemocratic. We want to do a democratic version. What they actually mean is we want capitalism with kinder characteristics, and we're going to get it by begging and pleading to the billionaire super rich to be a bit nicer to us. And our hope is they will find a few crumbs for us from the table, and the deal is we don't care where the crumbs came from. So hence the statement about Venezuela and Cuba and what awful regimes they are. It's a reminder to the working class. Don't imagine that rising up and changing society is going to benefit you. Your life will be even worse. That's always been the narrative of the fake socialists who work for the imperialists. It's always been the narrative the imperialists have pushed to us through 100 different channels. If you rise up and take power for yourself, the result is going to be worse than what you have now. So better the devil you know, right? That's always their message, right? And the other side of it is that it's an audition to the ruling class. I'm respectable. You can let me into office because I know how to play your game. We have exactly the same charade going on over here right now, as well as the new kind of Jeremy Corbyn party that's being promoted to people. There is a new leader, I don't know where he came from, a new leader of the Green Party, and he's very photogenic, and he's got he sounds very American. His name's Zach Polanski, which obviously sounds Polish, but you're used to hearing those kind of names in American politics much more than in British politics. Anyway, he's a kind of nice looking white guy who's really he's quite photogenic. He's appealing, and he's being massively puffed up as this big disruptor, just the way they've been puffing up Nigel Farage to the more right-leaning workers as a big disruptor, right? They're trying to present him like he's something really anti-establishment. But he's the leader of a party, number one, as soon as a so-called disruptive politician is getting a huge amount of airtime, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, if they're getting loads of airtime and press coverage in the ruling class media, it's because the ruling class wants you to think about them. In which case, they're definitely not really disruptors, right? That's something we need to start understanding and learning, right? Real disruptors don't get even mentioned, don't get their names mentioned in the ruling class media. There's a definite ban on mentioning the names of my party and my party's leaders in the ruling class media across the board. And that ban extends across the left as well. Right, there is no way the Palestine Solidarity Campaign would ever invite me as the leader of probably the most consistently anti-Zionist organization in Britain onto the platform of one of its demonstrations. Never. Right? Same with Stop the War Coalition. We, the party that actually has a real program about how the working class can be mobilized to stop the war machine, will never, ever be invited to speak from the platform of a Stop the War Coalition national meeting. Never. Right? We are persona non grata across the board, from the fake left all the way through the mainstream, all the way. So if you're really disruptive, if your program really threatens, the state and the establishment, they know how to deal with you. If they're promoting a disruptor at you, it's a curated disruption, right? It's to massage you back into believing what we said earlier, that there's a way to fix things in your interest as a worker through voting. And this guy, Zach Polanski, is being massively promoted. And now there's lots of kind of excited chatter amongst the online lefticals that Zara Sultana, who's part of the new Corbyn project, has been talking with Zach Polanski. And wouldn't that be amazing? This brilliant merger of the left, when we'll be really strong, and we'll be able to really disrupt things, and we'll be marching forward to socialism through the ballot box. But let's be clear, Zach Polanski is leader of a party which, after the launch of the SMO in Ukraine, Russia's special military operation, they reversed their policy on NATO. So previously, because they're never close enough to power for it to really matter, they're there to attract votes of people who are falling out of love with the Labour Party and the Liberal Party and all the rest of it. Green Party can have radical politics as long as it's far away from being elected to anything important. But the closer it gets, the more it has to discard all those policies and just get in line with everything imperialism needs and wants, and just kind of put a little green, frill around it, wrap it up with a nice, a recycled paper bow, and, say, and also we'll be riding our bikes to work, while we're bombing the world, right? Because that's really green. And people don't like to join the dots up and see that this is completely consistent with green politics across the planet. The first example, I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's right, of a Green Party getting into a coalition government was in Germany in 1999. Do you remember what that German government was involved in? Bombing Yugoslavia. NATO friendly. How green is it? They were dropping depleted uranium on Yugoslavia. And this guy, Joschka Fischer, I think his name was, I'm pretty sure, it's a long time ago and I haven't refreshed my memory, so apologies to anyone if I get these details wrong. I think he was involved in defense. He might have even been the defense minister, right? He was right up there in this government. He was cheerleading for the NATO war, which poisoned, never mind about overthrowing a sovereign government, right? Never mind about all that stuff, just from the perspective of his allegedly one point program of let's make the world more green, environmentally friendly. He was part of the government and cheerleading for a war that poisoned the air, land, water, and people of Yugoslavia, and wider area, of course, because you can't really contain these things, because they were using depleted uranium during that war, and the crops, the air, and the people were all poisoned, and that is an ongoing problem to this day. The cancer clusters and the irradiation, that lingers on till the present. Across modern-day Serbia and former Yugoslavia is an ongoing problem because of that war, right? This is the reality of green politics. It's imperialism, on a bike with a I don't know, a pot of jam or a shovel or, some little frill to say how environmentally friendly we are, a brown paper briefcase or whatever,
Lastly, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on what's happened in the Middle East, in Gaza. Recently, we have this so-called peace deal, but it seems to me that the pressure was heavy, not that it's much of a peace deal, but it seems to me that the pressure was extremely heavy on the imperialists, on the colonial nations, that interestingly, they fought all of this time. They were not able to defeat the resistance. The resistance grew stronger. They attacked Iran. Iran grew stronger. And eventually they had to, as they say, claim victory and tap out. Your thoughts on that particular dynamic?
100%, Garland. It seems to me that the pressure for bringing this particular ceasefire into effect, and let's be clear, it's a pause. This is a generation-long struggle, and it's not going to end anytime soon. In fact, it's a process. 7th of October, I remember the PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I was speaking to one of their representatives in North Africa last year, and he said to me, October the 7th really represented a shift in the resistance struggle where we went from strategic defense to strategic offense. And that's absolutely right. What we've seen is the resistance, getting up and pushing forward in a way we haven't seen for quite a long time, really not since the Second Intifada, certainly in Palestine itself. And this is something which has had a massive effect across not just the region, but across the world. But in terms of the regional axis of resistance, it's become, as you said, for all of the setbacks it has suffered because of decapitation strikes, sabotage, assassinations, and of course the fall of Syria. Nevertheless, what we have seen is a resistance emerging that is militarily stronger, organizationally more united, more coordinated, ideologically stronger, in the sense that now every single resistance movement basically says the same thing. Israel is the first main problem, and Israel has to go. There's no living with Israel anymore. We tried the peace with Israel formula. Turns out it's impossible, right? We kind of suspected it was impossible. Now we know. There's no living with Israel. There's no one in Palestine who still advocates the two-state solution, apart from perhaps Mahmoud Abbas, who is basically a stooge for the West, right? There's no real resistance movement that advocates trying the two-state thing out. Let's see if we can make it work. It's dead, completely dead. And it was the Israelis and their backers who killed it. So there's that. But there's a growing awareness and understanding that behind Israel stands American and British imperialism, and that really this struggle is to kick imperialism out of the Middle East. It will have, phases, but it's not going to end until not just Israel as a settler, colonial, supremacist, apartheid entity is demolished, but the various Gulf autocracies are going to come down, and the various mechanisms by which the Anglo-American imperialists in particular maintain their machinery of control in the Middle East are all going to have to be dismantled. That's all the bases. And, all the civil society structures, the proxy regimes, it's all going to have to be dismantled for the people of the region to be able to have genuine freedom, sovereignty, self-determination. That is a process that began to be acted on the 7th of October. And I think that is the struggle we are now witnessing, Garland. And, there's going to be many big moments and also many pauses along the way. This is a very important moment, because what we're actually seeing is that it's the Israelis and their backers who were desperate for this ceasefire. Israel has been hugely weakened. We don't get, it's like a blackout in the news for us over here to understand anything about what's happening in Israel. I think it's quite a blackout in Israeli news, right? Very, very difficult to get hold of information. But everything we hear is that militarily, socially, economically, Israel is on the verge of total implosion. It's only the huge subsidies and support of the West that keeps it sort of limping along. But even so, it can't do that forever. So Israel needs a reprieve itself, right? But the other thing, on the pressure from the West side is how much pressure the Western societies themselves are now under. In every country where the ruling class has been a prime mover in this conflict, they have come under huge pressure from their own people. They have responded to that pressure with repression. That repression has sparked wider resistance and anger. There's a real growing sense that something has to really change, and a growing number of people who are questioning not only Israel's actions, but their own government's reasons for unhesitatingly, unconditionally backing Israel. And what that's leading to is a growing understanding in the West, which has never understood what imperialism is on a mass scale. Mass of the people of the West have always lived in their nice little cocoon and thought that they just have a nice democracy and everybody else is a bit useless, right? But there's so many people now are being exposed to the reality, the repressive, dictatorial nature of the democracy they thought they lived in. That is creating real social problems for the ruling classes in every one of the imperialist countries, in the USA, in Britain, in France, in Germany, real social problems on the streets. And I think they want a reprieve as well. Again, I don't think this is something that's going to go away. They would like to be able to tell the people, look, it's all over, go back home, forget about it. But I don't think that's how it's going to be. Number one, Israel is not going to be able, and therefore its backers are not going to be able to allow a genuinely peaceful situation to continue for very long, because Israel and its backers really need the resistance axis to be destroyed. So they're going to have to come back in and try to, no doubt they'll play some dirty trick. No doubt they'll try and engage someone in talks and then bomb them. And then, we've seen the way they do this, right? But the point is, their situation impels them endlessly to war. That in itself pushes them further into the situation of creating the very crisis they're trying to escape. They're deepening their own crisis while they try to escape it. The only possible outcome that Israel can accept is they destroy all the axis of resistance. Imperialism becomes totally dominant in the Middle East. Everybody learns their place and there's no resistance forever. They're not going to get that. It's already obvious that can't happen. So Israel is essentially, by continuing on the same path, it has to continue on that path in order to continue existing. To continue on that path is to guarantee that it will in the future not exist, right? So that is actually where Israel is. Of course, it's easy to say that. It's very hard to be, a person who lives in Palestine or the Middle East and has to be faced with that reality. We all have to recognize that we have a part to play in accelerating the downfall and destruction of Israel as the entity that it is now, the settler colonial imperialist project for domination of the Middle East people and resources. We could actually help that happen quicker. And if it happens quicker, that means fewer lives lost in the Middle East, right? There is a role for us to play that is not just standing on the side and hoping that the axis of resistance can win sooner rather than later. We can help to speed that process up, and we must not allow the propaganda to tell us, oh, it's all over now, there's a peace process. I think a lot of people will not fall for that, but the ruling class will be trying to push that very hard. And I think the other thing that we've seen is about the axis of resistance itself, not just that it's become, more coordinated and more aware of what its long-term kind of strategic goals are, but actually how sophisticated it's become. That has been phenomenal to see. And I'm sure that behind the scenes, there are roles being played by China and Russia in this development, also by the DPRK, which has been, as I've talked to you before, has always been good at sharing its knowledge of guerrilla warfare with other resistance movements around the world. So we are seeing the Middle Eastern axis of resistance be bolstered by the global axis of anti-imperialist resistance. And really, we have to recognize, again, the Palestinian, the Middle Eastern front is one front of what is actually a global war that's going on right now. This is actually a part of World War III, just like the Ukraine front is a front in World War III, and the drive to war against China and DPRK is another front over in the east of Asia. But these aren't separate events. What we're looking at is the global imperialist system, the camp of the imperialists, NATO, USA, Britain, EU, desperately trying to save their system by conquering all sovereign territories, looting their resources and giving themselves a kind of economic boost to reset their profitability and save them from the collapse on which they're constantly teetering economically. And underneath everything we see, we have to understand there's an economic root. And there's an economic root to why the state machine is what it is and can't just be kind of reformed away like we were talking about earlier.
Well, thank you. We're very close to an hour. I know you're busy. We all have lots to do. And I certainly want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend an hour with us. Let everybody know where they can find you and follow all your good works, Joti.
Thanks, Garland. So I have a Telegram channel, which is just my name, Joti Brar. My party has a Telegram channel, The Communists. You can see our name down there. That's our website address, thecommunists.org. Please go there, sign up for our emails. If you can, go to the shop and subscribe to our newspapers or pick up any of our party pamphlets. A lot of it's available to read for free if you don't have money. But it's not about making money. Physical literature, in my experience, physical literature you learn much better from it. You engage much better with the content. You remember it much better. And it's very good for all of us to regain control of our brains and get out of the distraction machine. You know, we need to bring back our ability to focus, concentrate, learn, and really think. You know, it's a big part of our ability to organize ourselves as a class and get free, is making sure that we don't let those capabilities be lost in this world of, you know, the attention economy and the flicky, you know, internet screen type stuff. So there's that. We have for the internet peoples, we have a channel called Proletarian TV on YouTube, where there are lots of fantastic, you know, resources. And yeah, there's a lot of places you can find us online. But definitely, if you can engage with our study program, I really recommend that to you. If you go to our website, thecommunist.org, Marxist study program is on there under the tab that says Learn. And if you're in Britain, get in touch with us, get organized with us. We need to build.
Thank you very much, Joti Brar. Everyone, thank you for checking us out today. And the most important thing that you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much. We're out.